1 minute.
We'll start the video.
Okay. Stay standing, Jim. You have a few more seconds. A few more seconds.
Thank you for saving my knees.
Yes, yes.
How about your nephews?
We're at 10.
That was a bad dad joke.
I know. That's all I got. That's all I got.
2, 1. All right, everyone, please rise. Call the meeting to order. And pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dial in for Cooper.
We don't do an invocation on special meetings and roll call. I should call that first. Councilmember Navarrete. Here. Councilmember Aguilar.
Here.
Councilmember Byrd. Here. Councilmember Armitage.
Here.
Councilmember Lopez. Here. I am present and the Vice Mayor is en route and he will be here shortly. We've already done the pledge, and so I'm going to give Mr. Pryor a minute to turn on
Welcome,
the
and
phone.
thank you for choosing
Our attorney will be joining us
freeconferencecall.com. You're helping people.
telephonically today.
If you are the host, press star now. Otherwise, please wait, and you will be joined into the conference.
Mr. Cooper, are you on the line?
Is it not on the line? So
Guess maybe he's not coming to this.
I'll turn it all the way down.
Okay. So I'm going to turn the floor over. Tonight we're having a work session, presentation discussion on restoring Queen Creek. Mr. Pryor's prepared a very comprehensive report for all of us. Council really kind of encapsulating all the projects we've been working on in our water story. It'll be followed by a presentation by the Eastern Canal Watershed Group. So Mr. Pryor, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, and thank you everyone for giving me the time to discuss these issues. This will be more of a vision session than we've had in the past. We've all these components we've all been working on. We're all familiar with a lot of these pieces. I'll be repeating a lot of information you already have, but this is more about the overreaching vision for the restoration. It's also going to be a little quicker than normally I do this presentation because we have another presentation after mine, so I have to be cognizant of the time. The main focus of this presentation is going to be the historic impacts to Queen Creek, why it has transitioned from a perennial to an ephemeral creek. It only flows sometimes. What's the cause of that damage? How we can address some of the issues, some of that damage, and what our plan is to get the creek flowing again. When I first took over the job, I inherited several offices full of junk and old studies on shelves that nobody had read in 20 years. So one of the first things I did is went through all those documents. One of the documents was a study from 1998, the Jones-Stokes study, Queen Creek Riparian Area Restoration. That project was done under a Bureau Reclamation grant in '98. They actually started building one of the projects from the plan in 2001. Funding was lost. It was never completed. Part of the pipeline is sitting in the ground out by the wastewater treatment plant, and that has kind of formed some of our thinking around what projects we can do in the future. We got a facilitation grant from National Park Service, and that's what was the origin of the Superior Waters and Trails Plan, which pulled items from that '98 study that might be things we could actually build. It's an old study. Some of the things in there are no longer legally possible or practically possible, but some of them were very logical, and we immediately started pulling pieces out and started doing it. Some of them are quite small. We restored both of the bridges, the pedestrian bridges across Queen Creek. We got an AmeriCorps crew in that added 2 miles of trail. But when you add all these up, we've made some pretty significant progress. When I started doing the research on the 98 study and what the modern thinking was on these sort of restoration projects, I did a lot of internet research. I did a lot of studying online, and I came across this video, and this was very inspirational to me. It's a vision for what a riparian area restoration could actually look like, and simple deliverables that could get us to a good finish line without bankrupting anyone. And it's about a 7-minute video, so if you'll be patient with me, it is very important to our vision.
50 years ago, you couldn't hardly walk through this place. It was wall-to-wall brush. There wasn't any grass. There wasn't any water. Nobody wanted it. On the truck. On the truck. He's the finest dog in the United States of America. Out of Texas, too. Well, I was born in Ohio. Born into poverty, to be honest about it. Lived out in the country amongst the Amish people. So I really got my life example set for me by my own mother. That's where my love of the natural world came from. I've never inherited a nickel, but I inherited a love of the natural world and a respect for it. When I got out of the university, I took a job. I sold vacuum cleaners door to door. I went into the fast food business. I teamed up with a young man, Bill Church, and it was Church's Fried Chicken. And we built that company up to over 1,600 stores, and we sold it. And with that capital, I was able to come here and begin my work on Sela, Bamberger Ranch Preserve. My objective was to take the worst piece of land I could possibly find in the hill country of Texas and begin a process of restoration that would change it back to be one of the best, and that has happened right here. By habitat restoration, by working with Mother Nature instead of against her, and that's what we're all about. 46 years ago, not a drop of water. 7 water wells were drilled, 500 foot deep. Not a one produced any water. The top 125 foot of these hills looks like this. It's Edwards limestone. When the driller drilled all those wells for me, he said, Bamberger, there was one place up here on the top, my bit dropped 40 foot. He said, you got a cavern under there. It's like an auditorium. The only thing about it was, 46 years ago, it had no water in it. It was dry. It was dry because the water that was coming in was running off as opposed to sinking in. When I came here, all the little holes and all of that limestone were just as dry as the one I'm holding in my hand. Now what happened? We replaced that condition with this condition 2.5 years after we began. The first spring came to life. As we continued on, another spring showed up. We got up to where we had a levee. Where did the water come from? It came out of all of that holes in that perched aquifer like that. That's where it come from. It was stored in the earth, and all because of one thing, just one. And I'm telling you, I'm going to show you the greatest conservation tool ever made, and everything I talk about could not have happened without grass. The hill country is just covered with woody species. Primarily, it's cedar. We took out a great portion of it here on the ranch. We were just covered with it. We had no grass. When we took out the cedar and spread native grass seeds, and it began to grow, rainfall then percolated into the earth because of the root system of grass going down. Water percolates in, it fills up your aquifer until the aquifer is full, and when it's full, it has to come out somewhere, and they call that a spring. That spring supplied water for all the nature's critters, plus for all the families that live here, and it even sends water downstream to the city of Boston. And what does it cost? Our governments and governments all around the world are spending millions and millions of dollars doing all kinds of things, dams and reservoirs and pipelines, and all of this can be done by you and I. We don't have to have government. We can't expect government to do it all anyway. But if we do have some conservation ethics, the results are mind-boggling.
Now, do we see that kind of erosion here?
I'm telling you, truthfully, I've seen this property and the experiences that people have here change lives.
What does SELA mean?
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. What does SELA mean? When I was younger, I discovered in the Psalms the word Selah. It means to stop, to pause, to look around you and reflect on everything you see. To me, that's like Thoreau was to Walden Pond. Gives us a chance to say, what's my duty as a steward of this ranch land? And I believe it's to take care of it and to share it. And if you don't share what you have, you're going to live a lonely life. That is a necessary ingredient for every human being, that we need to catch up and live amongst Mother Nature and learn to appreciate her for what she really is. I've given this land to a foundation. It'll go on in perpetuity. It'll never be any different than you see it today. When I leave this world, that's what I want as part of my legacy.
When I actually started looking into the science of what he was doing, there's some pretty sound science. This is a study by Texas A&M. It focuses on the Texas Hill Country and San Pedro Basin and Mesquite Bosque and Tamarask invasions, and it talks about reducing woody species and thinning out your bigger tree species, allowing native grasses to grow back, and the benefits to the aquifer are huge. If you look at the bottom line, I've got some of the bottom lines that come from this simple treatment mechanism. You decrease the fire fuels loading. You decrease the water drunk by the system. You decrease the erosion so that the ground becomes more healthy. You increase the shallow water aquifer recharge. There's that whole long list is different different things that this project will do by one simple treatment, which is to go in and thin the woody brush species. And this study it actually quantifies some of the impacts. Some of the creeks saw per acre an increased flow of 27,000 gallons of water per year per acre of treatment. So we're talking acre feet of water we can restore to the creek without having to add any water at all. We just reduce the amount of water that the ecosystem draws. It's a healthier ecosystem. It creates a canopy. It creates more shade. It creates places for birds to nest off the ground, so they're not in the brush on the ground. There are many bottom lines for it. There also, because there are many different bottom lines, there are many different funding mechanisms. We have successfully written grants for forestry management, for invasive species reduction, and for fire fuels reduction, all with the same job description of the project. We didn't change it. We're doing the same thing. We're reducing the woody species, thinning the trees, and getting rid of the invasive species. And by doing that, we are changing the amount of water, we're changing the ecosystem, and we're doing actual restoration without having to add water. If we do add water, there are more bottom lines and there's less waste in the system, so we're not just putting water into the system, so it's to add more mesquite bosque. Why the impacts that got us here are, I'm going to go into those, into why the ecosystem is like it is. This isn't the natural system, and before colonization, Arizona was about 90% grassland. Now it's about 90% scrubland. And we put out all our fires. We graze. It was very fertile, very productive land when it was 90% grassland, so we put a lot of cattle on it. And then it became steadily less productive as brush took it over. And so that we kind of decreased and decreased and decreased the space that was available for grazing. So the productivity of the land has gone from, 10 acre per head to 100 plus acres per head and so we do more damage to the system the more heavily we graze it. What are our restoration goals? Riparian area recovery, shallow aquifer recharge, restoration of the perennial base flow, and recreation use. The perennial base flow, people who lived in the town prior to the about 50s, 60s said that the creek flowed 10 months out of the year and dried up a couple months of the year. Now it's the exact opposite. It flows, if we're lucky, 2-3 weeks of the year, and it dries up the rest. And because it has transitioned from a perennial creek to an ephemeral creek, which means it only flows when it rains. So how do we get that perennial base flow back into the creek? How do we get the shallow aquifer recharged? Because the shallow aquifer, to describe it simply, you've got a bunch of trees that have roots that are maybe 15 feet deep. If the water table dries up and gets below that 15 feet, the root system can't reach that water, the tree dies. If it doesn't get enough water, the tree dies. If you go along Queen Creek, the 98 study, and you can just see it with your eyes, you can see the cottonwood die off in the creek. The trees have huge dead sections, they're struggling to survive, they're under definite stress. By reducing the competition, by restoring some of the base flow, will help those riparian areas come back. And by doing that, we also create this great ecotourism asset, a beautiful creek that you want to look into and you want to be next to, a cooler environment because we're doing evaporative cooling in our local area. So it has many positive bottom lines. Why was Queen Creek perennial in the past? In the past, the geology of our area is fairly complex. It's a huge subsiding caldera, Picket Post being the center of an old volcano. And there was a huge eruption, it blew out a big basin. That basin, over the years, it's split, and the mountains above us have gone up and the basin has gone down. It's much more weathered. It's still limestone, but it's a different type of limestone. It's more weathered, it's more porous above us, so it would store water in heavy rain events. And it would slowly release that water out of perched aquifers over the extended period. So just like he was saying, it's a sponge. It's a rock sponge, but it's a sponge. It absorbs water and then it releases it slowly. Right now, that sponge has been undermined by mine activity over the last 100 years. I mean, the first impacts from the undermining activity were felt in 1902, the first documented ones that we could find, where springs began to dry up in Queen Creek. And I'll show you more about that as we get further in. But that huge spongy area up there that stored a ton of water and released it back to the town, that system's broken now. It doesn't work anymore, which is why we don't get a perennial base flow to the town. When it gets to the town itself, that white area, that's the caliche we all know. It's concrete by a different name. You dig a foot down and you hit the caliche. It extends thousands of feet beneath you. It doesn't absorb much water. It's very low transmigration. It doesn't sink in very well. So it's an entirely different sort of aquifer. There is still water in the Gila conglomerate, which is what it's called. Most of the wells in town pull water from the Gila conglomerate. But it'll be very difficult to recharge because it's so hard. So any water we put on top of it will take, many lifetimes to sink back down to the area we're pulling from. So our takeaways: the caliche does not absorb water easily. The rock higher in the Queen Creek, again, is very porous. It's very fractured from old mine activity. So that's the system that would normally have moderated our stream activity. Interactions between the surface and the groundwater are very high above town. The water that flows in the creek flows into the ground at a very high rate. And that's some of the conversations we've had with Resolution about restoring that water, because they can see that water showing up at the pumps under the ground. They can quantify increased pumping during rain events and see the difference and see how much water is coming into them. The first impacts, again, between 1900 and 1920, the Lake Superior mining operation started mining at the town of Queen, essentially, right on the Lost Trail. You can see where the old mill was. If you look across, you can see the tunnel that they used to enter and bring their ore in. It's right at creek level, and it extends below creek level in that whole section. That entire section above town, from about just about the lower carbonate pond, which is a little pond right above Magma Bridge, all the way to the tanks, is completely fractured. And most of this is because of historic mine impacts. That's why the system's broken. And these aren't recent impacts. They started about 1900. Most of the real serious impact was felt by the 50s. The Never Sweat seems to have been the biggest, the latest, most serious impact that really was the death knell of the creek. Everyone knows the mining history. I won't spend as much time on that because we're trying to rush through this a little bit. But you can see that Superior, about 1890 is really when Superior starts to take off. All of the mining operation, again, one of the impacts is they cut all of the trees in the entire valley to feed the steam generators. It was an electrified plant out at Pinal, but they used steam generators to get it, so they cut every tree in the entire region. Which is why when Boyce Thompson came to town, if you look at the old pictures of the Arboretum, there is nothing there. There's cactuses and no trees. So his project was one of the first riparian area restorations, and probably the most successful in the state. There used to be 3 springs that were dammed up and used to feed drinking water to the town. All the pipes are still there, all the dams are still there. There's no water in them. They began to dry up. You can see there's a pond in 1885. That is the upper carbonate spring. You can see now where the spring used to come out of the rock, there's nothing. There is no water coming out. One of the other dams you can see is Oak Flat itself. It's got a dam right there. That meadow is the silted up dam they used to feed drinking water to the town. And here's the mining activity. You can see the pumping shafts down there at the bottom. They're spread across the whole system, and they extend. The circle is the modern mining stuff, and all of the other shafts and all the other impacts are the older mining that was shut down in the 80s. And here's a top-down view, and you can see in this area right here, this is the Lake Superior mining operation, the first mining operation at the turn of the last century. It is the worst of the fracture zone, and that is that fracture zone we're talking about that extends from the Magma Bridge up into the water tank. The environmental impact statement. I won't spend too much time on this. You all were there for that presentation where I explained all the impacts. The town and resolution identified through the EIS a whole bunch of water impacts and other impacts, and we have worked hard to negotiate mitigations for all of them. So anything that I list as a minor impact for the current, we do have an existing agreement to rectify it and to restore the water and to solve the problem. If the EIS had never happened, these problems would have continued in perpetuity. The fractures don't go away. As long as the pumps are on, no water is going to come out of that system. And here again, this is the EIS. We talked about this. A 18% decrease in the stream flow when the subsidence crater goes in. There are a bunch of drainages that drain across the subsidence crater, and that affects the flow to the creek and the upper watershed. Our watershed is very small. We're only talking the upper watershed that feeds Queen Creek right to Magma Bridge is about 22 square miles. It broadens up hugely once it passes the bridge. It becomes a whole Superior Basin, and then it becomes the entire Gila River Basin, and so it gets steadily bigger as it goes out. So the impacts that are felt above town are felt very dramatically at our boundary, and they dissipate as they go further down. There's less impact going further away, which is why the EIS said that there's only a 3% impact to the water table at or to the stream flow at the Arboretum, because enough other watersheds come in to restore to raise the amount so that it's less of an impact. And here is I'll go back. This is the amount of water that is being lost to the creek every year. There are several different models that were used. There are different quantification methods. It has wet periods and dry periods, and the average of all those numbers is 471 acre feet of water. That's what our agreement says that resolution will give back to us to restore the base flow. When that's going to happen, where that water is going to come from is a question that hasn't been answered yet. There's a working group that's discussing it. Resolution will be presenting that to us shortly so that we can see what the plan is to restore that water. You can see from this picture where the water is going. This is on the left here, this is a video that the mayor took hiking on the trail. It's about a 4-foot wide stream flowing down Queen Creek, and it hits a certain spot of the creek and it just disappears. If you go to that same sort of area and you look, there's a hole in the bottom of the creek that you can't see the bottom of. It just disappears. So when we got a lot of flow like we have now, so that those seep areas can't draw it all off, we get water on the surface. But whenever it drops below a certain tipping point where they can seep into those fractures, the creek flow goes completely away. So what are the mitigations we're going to do? One of the discussions originally was to return freshwater mine inflow. The Never Sweat, as I mentioned previously, the Never Sweat was very shallow. It was almost right at the surface, and you can see that's the kind of yellow, that's the kind of yellow-green line right here. It's very close to the creek surface, and when they put it in, water immediately started flowing in. And the 98 study said, I think it was about 150 gallons per minute that always flowed into that shaft. And the 98 study said that they would take that water. It used to be used for on-site operations like drinking water and flushing the toilets on site. But the 98 study theorized that they could take that water, return it to Magma Bridge, and restore 100 acre feet of base flow to the creek. The Never Sweat has since been shotcreted from end to end and repinned, and it doesn't leak near as much anymore. It still leaks, but it doesn't leak near as much. So that isn't going to be as good a source, so we're going to have to identify other sources. Okay, the EIS also says that, that resolution will implement a plan to remove exotic species and manage floodway vegetation in Queen Creek. There's a 35-acre conservation easement that will be put on the creek. It covers the area from the US 60 bridge to about the discharge from the wastewater treatment plant down near the Castleberry. That that is on hold until the EIS passes, but it's also why I haven't written any grants for that area. You'll notice all of the projects that I have written grants for and gotten funded are outside of that direct and that conservation easement, because resolution will pay to mitigate those when the EIS passes. They have agreed to additional monitoring, enhanced monitoring. They've added new stream flow monitors to the creek to make sure that they can tell when the flow goes down and to see how it's responding to the restoration. They're also monitoring groundwater wells. They put out a big ask to every groundwater well in town looking for volunteers to be monitored so they could see if there was a groundwater drop and they could mitigate for that groundwater drop. And they have also agreed to restore the lost stream flow due to the subsidence impacts and to the dewatering pumping. And that's 471 acre feet for the dewatering pumping, and then 20%, roughly 18% of whatever the maximum stream flow at the top would be. Roughly that is about another 250 acre feet. So that will all be restored to the creek. That restoration point, one of the things we worked out in this Superior Waters and Trails Action Plan is we want that water to be dropped right here. And that makes sense for two reasons. Number one, it flows through town, of course, it restores our riparian area. And right here, roughly, is the concentrator fault. So the ground drastically changes from this side to this side. Here it's porous and it sinks right back in. Here it's hard as a rock and it doesn't sink in at all. So the water we restore here will stay in the creek. So if we want to do positive reuses for it, our loss to the ground is going to be very low. We've done a lot of, the Superior Waters and Trails Action Plan, we've done a lot of these things. I can't really see them particularly well right now at this size, but there's 3 or 4 items on this list that are done. The extension of the Lost Trail, the restoring of the bridges, the wastewater treatment plant is being done now. The Army Corps pipeline is on the way, and I'll talk more about that. So we got a Congressman Stanton. When the EIS first came out, the town put together a stakeholder group of all of the water players in the area. We have the Eastern Pinal Watersheds on it, the water companies on it, Resolution's on it, we're on it, the Pinal County Water Resource Managers on it, and Pinal County Flood. And we've been working on strategies to mitigate these issues. One of the things that came out of that is the resolution engineers put forth an idea to use an old infiltration gallery that used to provide drinking water to the town to collect some of that water before it went into the fracture zone. So right near the water tank that feeds us our drinking water, there's a pipe that goes into the creek with holes in it. And water goes into that pipe and it's pumped out, and it used to provide a good portion of the drinking water to the town. They stopped using it because the turbidity went too high. And turbidity just means solids in there, sand, dirt, too much turbidity in it. And they didn't want to filter it out, so they abandoned it because they have the wells down in the valley. So it's sitting there unused. We've signed the agreement with Arizona Water to give us access to that. We pay them $1,000 a year and we can pump as much out of it as we can pump. We've talked to ADEQ and ADWR. ADEQ says since we're not adding or subtracting anything to the water, we don't need any discharge permits. And it's just, and you're doing it in the same reach, so the same length of creek. And they say because we aren't subtracting or adding anything to the water, we're not adding more water or less, ADWR does not need a permit for that as well. So it doesn't need any of the permits that would generally make these sort of projects difficult. So that pipeline is going to go past the fracture zone along the old US 60 and drop it at the lower carbonate pond, which is right there. That's a picture of the lower carbonate pond. This was the test discharge this year where we put, Resolution put about 65 gallons per minute into the creek to test how the creek could respond to it. So we did 2 sections. We did one for 15 days in a very wet period, and then we did one for 30 days in a very dry period. The study, I haven't seen it yet, it's not finished, but it should give us an idea on how that riparian area responds to that recharged water. The lower pipeline is the one from the 98 study that was started in 1990 and 2001 that goes from the effluent discharge of the wastewater treatment plant up to the US 60 park. And the vision in the 98 study is that we would do a restoration of a cottonwood stand and of a native cottonwood stand. There are cottonwoods in there, but a good portion of them are dying off. One of the suggestions that's come out of the working group is that we work with NAU. There's a study program out of there trying to to create desert adapted cottonwoods that drink less water and are more survivable in our ecosystem. So there's a research project that we want to work through with NAU and through Boyce Thompson to try to see if we can figure out a really efficient way to do that. Between those 2 projects, they're about 110 acre-feet per year. They are both sustainable without the EIS. So whether Resolution or not completes its EIS, whether the rest of the restoration water comes online, all of the other things, this is sustainable just with the resources we have. Resolution's given us a match of $750,000. We've got 2.25 from the Army Corps of Engineers from it, but once it's built, it can be sustained in perpetuity. It's not going to be a resource that runs all year round. It is a creek resource, so it will dry up during the hottest part of the year. But out of some of these studies we've done, the cycling the creek is important. We need to turn off the water and let everything dry out and let the native ecosystem restore itself, because that's what the natural system used to be. It used to flow 10 months of the year and then turn off for 2 months. So without that shut off, we could be changing the ecosystem at too great a rate. So, but because of the water source that we have, we'll probably have to do that anyway. So we've started the riparian area restoration. We've treated in 2022 we did 2 acres to do the Lost Trail. But while we were doing the Lost Trail, we didn't just do the trail. We also did a 40-foot wide swath as a proof of concept on this treatment regime. We thinned all the trees to 20 feet apart. Anything under about 8 inches at the root ball, we cut down. We made space for the trees, the canopies to grow, and for it to spread into the gap. That was a $35,000 forestry grant and an Army Corps of Engineers team. In 2022 as well, 2023, we did a 7.5 acre floodway lot we got from Dr. Wilt, which is the Old Phoenix Road lot. And you can see in that lot what the end project is supposed to look like. That's the goal. You can also see right now with this rain why we bothered. All of these cleared areas are coming up grass. So you've got this big canopy that's grown up significantly and has started to fill in the gaps, and you've got the native grasses filling in the ground underneath them, which is the desired condition. In 2023, we did the 7.5 acre section of Queen Creek from the Magma Bridge all the way to the US 60 park. And again, it's hard to see from the road, but if you go over and you look into the creek, it is pretty significant. I would encourage anyone to go onto one of the pedestrian bridges and look up and down the creek. It is shocking how different it is. I just did it today. I did it today because Keep Arizona Beautiful is going to come out and pick up all the garbage, because when we cut the trees down, piles of garbage popped out from under the bushes. So we're going to go in and pick all that garbage out. That's happening in March. And here is the US 60 lot, right after we finished it, our Old Phoenix Road lot. And you can see what I mean. You trim the trees, you widen it up, cut most of the trees down. You let the grasses grow into the gaps, and you'll see almost no scrub in there. Again, I've already talked about the Legends of Superior Trail extension, but if you look on the right, you'll see a lot of similarity. Now, this is a trails project. It's not a repair and restoration. It's not a park project, but it looks just about like all the other projects because that same mechanism has multiple bottom lines. We targeted invasive species. The tamarask, there's not a ton of them, but there are some in our creek. The oleander, there are a ton of them. Another one that's not on this list that we targeted was trees of heaven. They're extremely overgrown in our area. In fact, they're kind of taking over the jungle area, which is another grant. We worked with Wild Arizona this year through DFFM. We helped them write the grant, and they've gotten a grant to clean all of the jungle from the end of the Castleberry all the way up through the Arboretum and get rid of all of those trees of heaven and all the invasives and open up that riparian area down in the jungle. What we didn't go after is fountain grass. And everyone who's walked through the highlands will see that we have a massive fountain grass problem. It is in all the yards. People think it's pretty. It's illegal to have it in your yard, but everybody has it anyway. It takes multi-year treatments to get rid of it. It's very hard to get rid of it. You have to dig it up, you have to treat the hole, you have to chemically treat, and then you have to come back the next year and do it again, and then the next year and do it again. I've heard it take up to 5 years to get rid of fountain grass. So our plans for the future. We're going to restore the base flow like we talked about. The $3 million Army Corps grant. I spoke to them this week. That will be to contract and the funding approved by May is the deadline they've given me. It will have to go through a NEPA after that. Hopefully not a very extensive one. Hopefully just an EA. But we'll still have to probably another year out before we can start building. We're going to continue to go for every invasive species and fire fuel reduction grant to try to get rid of that underbrush that we can. And we've gotten, I think, 4, maybe 5 successful grant cycles for either fire mitigation or invasive species. Again, it's the same project, but it's different funding mechanisms. So it makes it so we can apply for a bunch of different grants. We can apply for more than one in one grant cycle because they have different stated purposes. So we are working also to create a watershed management strategy with the Bureau of Reclamation. That grant application has been submitted. It will be I think about a $200,000 project and probably take a year. What it does is it creates a ad hoc committee made up of locals and the stakeholders to design watershed strategies. And it'll do studies, it'll determine what are good targets. One of the things it may say is, like, for instance, a recharge project within the town of Superior would have almost no impact because there's such slow transmigration of water and that's such hard rock. So maybe we do one out by the desert oil field instead. And maybe that's better impact because it allows us to pull more water from that. Who knows? Maybe they say what we really need to do is a wetland in the town, and the White Hills becomes a wetland. That's one of the ideas that was put forward. The math will be done on that. They will determine whether it's viable. They will determine how much it costs. And then we will have a plan to take to funders to get funded. So I don't know what's going to come out of that study. It's a spigot against the wall kind of thing, where all options are on the table until they're tested. All right. Again, we're going to continue to build trails. The AmeriCorps crew is building a loop trail system right now in the US 60 park. It's going to be about a 1/3 mile loop for the morning walkers. So it'll be 2 people can walk side by side and do their morning walk in the US 60 park. All right. Again, we're going to focus heavily on public-private partnerships. Most of these grants have matches. We would not have been able to get this far without match funding from Resolution and seed money and engineering money and facilitation money. And I'm sure Brian has a better idea how much all that's cost, but it's a lot of things that have been provided to the town to get us this far. We've done a lot of the work ourselves as well, but public-private partnerships, the ability to apply for some of these grants that have higher matches is going to be vital for our ability to carry it forward. Water is the most important issue for the future. For the next 30, 100 years, water should be one of the primary focuses of any community. Everything I've talked about today is one aspect of a bigger picture, of our total water picture. This is the Queen Creek restoration. There are other items that we need to talk about on how we're going to access surface water if groundwater is no longer allowed to be the primary mechanism in the AMA. We are in the Phoenix AMA. The governor has said that no assured water certificates for new development for any subdivision over 5 units will be issued from groundwater storage. All of our water comes from a groundwater well system that is 26 miles away. And many of you have toured that. I would encourage you all to take the tour when next time it comes around. Arizona Water is going to be presenting at the next meeting and giving you more information on that. But how are we going to get water from the CAP canal or from other surface water rights we purchase and add to the CAP canal and get it to the town well field so that we can use it to do any development in town? For instance, the 40-acre lot the school has, they cannot develop it. They had an investor come very interested in purchasing that, and they passed when the governor put forward the assured water certificate ruling. So how do we get water to mitigate that? And that's one of the things the working group is working on as well. How are we going to we're going to have to build a pipeline from the CAP canal to the desert well field. Are we going to have to do a recharge project in the desert well field? All these issues are big picture issues. They're high dollar item issues. We're going to need all the help we can get. And that's all I've got to say. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Council, any questions from the council? We do have a few minutes. We do have another presentation. Is there any questions from the audience? Well, Todd, thank you for this presentation. I know you always do a very great job at giving council updates throughout all of these projects, but this was a really wonderful, put together all the different parts and pieces in the history of the project. So thank you. Council, just last call for any questions for Mr. Pryor on this. All right. Hearing none, we do have Mr. Jimmy O'Donnell from the Eastern Pinal Watershed group, who's going to also present on some of the work that they're doing and the research that they're planning.
You can give me just a moment. I'll get your video loaded.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Jim. Is this on?
Yes.
Jim O'Donnell, born and raised here in Superior. And you can hold that a little bit.
Okay.
And I started working on this project 7 years ago. In 2019, I formed a nonprofit group, mainly of Superior graduates. It's called Eastern Pinal Watershed. And the whole idea is conserve, capture, and share. Very simple mission statement. We've got so much water running through the system, and today's a perfect example. Let me give you a little history. Pinal Township was a mill, and they milled the Silver King mine. Now, my experience in the mills, you can't operate unless you have a sustainable source of water. So that was why the mill was there. Now, in the mid-50s, the Army Corps of Engineers put Willow Dam in. And what Willow Dam did was they located it right where the sand wash meets the Queen Creek. That was a major, major water source. And so they put it up there. And that's when the Roosevelt Water Conservation District was formed down in Mesa. And so those are the historical aspects of the water that we have here, okay? And the most recent is that in my discussions with Jeff Surrey, the supervisor for this area, we went there and presented this program, and he was really interested in the watershed that went down to Devil's Canyon. actually, that splits in half King Crown and Oak Flats. The western part comes down to Queen Creek, eastern part goes down to Devil's Canyon. Devil's Canyon runs south, and it meets up with Mineral Creek, a watershed on the southwest Pinellas. And they have what we call a Ray Dam there. It's a new one, it's been like 35, 40 years. The Ray Dam is there. And Kennecott at the time rebuilt that dam because they couldn't afford flooding of the open pit. So that's part of our watershed, but it went to the east. Now, coming to the west, we have a lot of watershed. That's the state of Arizona in 1983 formed the active management area. And they petitioned, resolution at the time, petitioned Superior being the Phoenix AMA, not the Pinal AMA, because they discovered they have a lot of water here, and they wanted to have a little bit more control of it. That's fine, that's good. So they broke it down in two watersheds. They have the Superior proper watershed on a historical annual 20 inches a year. Now that's through a historical 23-year drought. Now they also have another Superior watershed, east-northeast Superior. This is all documented by the Phoenix AMA, which consistently has 24 inches of rain. That's Oak Flats and King Crown, the mountains to the north. So that's a lot of water for this watershed. And that's why Pinal was formed with the mill, and that's why Willow Dam was built. That being said, we thought, my board's consisted of all high school graduates. We've got David Herrera, he's our president, raise your hand. We got Manuel Sanchez, our treasurer. We got Anson King, he's a member. And Henry Munoz, he knows a lot about water. So we tap into his resources too. So this is all about water. This is rainwater. This is not groundwater. And we have an abundance of rainwater. And that's why we put this short little video together. You want to start it?
Sure.
And I'll look at you to stop.
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is a photo of the eastern dam, proposed obviously. And this is the western dam, the existing area and the proposed area. It's over there by Wilson Mountain Basin. Here's downtown before and what could be afterwards. Conserve, capture, and share the headwaters of Queen Creek. We have a few eastern waterfalls. We're probably running right now. This is closer to, on the north side of 60, this is closer to Oak Flats. That drains directly into the Queen Creek. Everybody knows the big waterfall. portion. And here's where it meets the Queen Creek, right up there next to Oak Flats. So Queen Creek draws from many, many water features. And here's by Mammoth Club. That's running today, just like that. Born and raised here, this is very common every time it rains. This is a dip, which is closed once in a while. Conserve, capture, and share. Need to conserve water running down Queen Creek. Queen Creek, watershed has historical rainfall of 20 inches a year, as per Phoenix AMA. Recycling water from the eastern to the western will be considered. Now we capture with reservoirs that flow down the creek continuously. When it gets to the western reservoir, we pump it back up to the creek. It's a continuous loop. In our discussions with Mike Pierce, he's a water attorney, and there's very few water attorneys in the state of Arizona. We went in there and we had a nice little conference, and we explained the project to him. He told us right off the bat, this is a non-consumptive use of surface water. And we go, okay, what does that mean? It does not equal groundwater. Groundwater and surface water are two different objects. And if we have a non-consumptive use of water, the laws will benefit our project. So that's what we want, a non-consumptive use of the watershed. Go ahead.
Sorry, too many computers.
And this, our reservoirs could be used for fire safety. I was here for the telegraph fire, and it took 40 minutes round trip to fill up the Chinook and put water. We can achieve this by municipal bonds, government grants, and private funding. Now, another consultant, there was a bond manager for Bear Stearns in Chicago for 42 years. He retired, and I brought him up there to meet Mayor Bessich and Todd, and he volunteered to be the gatekeeper for bonds. I asked him the other day, and I said, what do you think of the terms? He said, well, they could be 40, 50, 60 years. He said, because this appears in an opportunity zone, there's a good possibility those municipal bonds could be guaranteed by the government. He said, that's a possibility. That was 42 years of bond. That's Mr. Mitchell. And so this is what we want. We are parallel with the city plan right now. We have, the only difference is we want the use of surface water, not groundwater. Because as Todd mentioned, groundwater will run out. But our surface water has a record of being sustainable for 23 years of the most historical drought we've ever had. So this is a watershed that's maintained. It's still there. Let's conserve, capture, and share. Any questions?
I don't particularly have any specific questions. Council, do any of you have questions for Mr. O'Donnell?
Well, that's good information.
Mr. Pryor, do you have any? Oh,
I didn't know if I heard you correctly. Like if the reservoirs were to happen, you're pumping from the bottom one?
Recycling, yes. Recycling. And that is considered a non-consumptive use of water, which negates a lot of the water laws here in the state of Arizona, which we have the toughest, and we should have the toughest water laws. This has been through a 23-year historical drought. We still have a sustainable flow in the creek. Let's conserve, capture, and share it. And we would like to, as a nonprofit organization, we'd like to entertain an agreement with the city to be maybe a fiscal or financial umbrella, go under the financial umbrella. Because my grant consultant, she said that if you go into the city, they have credibility now with the grant community. And this would not this would not take any effort except for a grant agreement and a grant so it'll go under your financial umbrella. She says that makes it a lot easier because you have historical admin for grants and you have credibility to get grants. And we do it on our own, we go out and write grants. Kirsten Sinema, I just went to a conference with her during the summertime. She has, our senator, Kirsten Sinema, she has $4.5 billion to spend in Western water projects. And what they're gonna do, the majority of that's gonna go to Real Reimagine. They're gonna start in Mesa and go all the way to Buckeye, and they're gonna restore the Salt River there. They're gonna basically duplicate Tempe Town Lake. And you know, Tempe Town Lake only has 3,000 acre-feet of water. We can accumulate that real easy.
So what kind of studies have been done, like what would be the effect upstream of these reservoirs? Like are there any studies that have to be done so we know that? And also, like what kind of permitting or process would we have to go through to even
Great question.
build these, I guess?
We approached the Industrial Development Authority in Florence, and their committee put together to give low-interest loans to businesses throughout Arizona. John Tamlone happens to be the president, and we worked 2 years to get on the agenda. October 2nd, we did this presentation, and we had a unanimous vote. We went in there with a presentation of $125,000 worth of a grant, and they pondered and everything because we're rookies in the grant arena.
I guess, I'm sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you. I guess I'm not, right now, I'm like, not asking about the money, I'm asking about like, permitting, like for the Corps of Engineers or the, you know, what would we need from them to even give?
I was giving you the long answer.
Sorry.
We have enough money to fund a feasibility study. We've hired Coe and Van Loo, very reputable. They're the ones that put the master plan together for Desert Superstition Vistas. We've met with them, and last Friday I signed, and John Tamlone signed the contract. The monies aren't coming to our organization. They're going to the IDA's attorney, and they're gonna pay Coe Van Loo. They're gonna do the feasibility study, they're gonna do the water studies, they're gonna do everything. And if that's not enough money for the studies, we still have an open-end, supposedly grant, up to $125,000. Even though the monies didn't filter through us, they went directly to the IDA attorney and right to the consultant. So that is in process now. Hopefully by May 10th, if we get everything done and we get all the information to them, they'll have the feasibility study. They're gonna encompass the water flow, and they're also gonna encompass the economic development when it comes to the water flow. Getting rid of the flood zones, and having adequate fire protection for Forest Service, and economic growth for this town, on the north and south side of the creek.
And Mr. O'Donnell, again, thank you. Council, I want to be mindful, we're already at 7:02, our next meeting should already be started. Is there any final questions?
I would like to make sure I make a comment. The feasibility phase of this is not passed. It is likely there are significant technical and permitting challenges to this. If the project does come to the finish line, it will likely not look like the presentation we see. This is a conceptual idea. It would have to be significantly changed. There are definite problems with the fact, for instance, that there's documented leakage into the mine workings, and we want to build a reservoir over top of a leaking fracture zone. That's going to have to be addressed. There's lots of issues that are going to have to be addressed. So if the town's going to participate in a significant way, we want to make sure we're involved in the feasibility study phase so we can raise these issues so they can be addressed. So when the final product comes to the finish line, we can all agree it's a good idea.
Yep, absolutely. And you can research Coe and Van Loo. They're the premier consultants in the state of Arizona. Like I said, they put the feasibility together for Superstition Vistas. Very credible. They know Pinal County. They know it. And excuse me, Mayor, we've got a recommendation letter from Andrew Line the mayor circulated the encouragement letter for you board, to the board here, and we got that. And these encouragement letters from Sturdy, Miller, Chris Zapata, the old manager that started this project, we got all these encouragement letters that say we need more studies, and you are correct. We need more studies. Let's figure it out. We have the water, let's figure it out.
Well, we definitely appreciate your work and the time that you commit to all of these water subgroups. We always, concur that the more voices at the table and everybody being involved and informed is very important. I really want to thank staff for putting together this presentation. Todd, I know you've been on your Queen Creek Restoration Roadshow. You've been over at Regenerating Sonora and at some of the different events. So I appreciate that. And I think, everything, I think one thing that this council knows for sure is that everything takes a lot of feasibility studies, a lot of research and development before we can even break ground. And we'll be going over that in our agenda today. But with that, council, does anybody need a convenience break, or can we move into our next meeting? Everybody good? Okay, we're gonna keep moving everything right along.
Thank you for your time.
We're adjourning the work session at this time and turning right into call to order for the 7 p.m. meeting. Roll call, Councilmember Burke.
Mayor, could you give me just a moment to end one stream and start the next?
Sorry. I guess if anybody does need to go,